This is a follow-up to my previous video on the topic of examining JoJo's Bizarre Adventure through the lens of musical metaphors. That video, to which there should be a link on the screen right now, sets up a simple analogy. Imagine seeing JoJo's parts as individual albums, and the fights in those parts as songs. But if every fight is a song, then the obvious question is, who is writing those songs?
We don't know. That's why there's a question mark on his face. That's not the way his face looks. That's just a question mark.
The obvious answer is Hirohiko Araki himself, as the author of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I don't think anyone's going to deny the fact that he is the one writing these fights, setting up the powers in any given fight, whether it's Stray Cat versus Killer Queen or Caesar versus Wham, or if you like the other pronunciation, Araki is the one who lets these powers interact, letting the story of the parts and any relevant character development unfold as the outcomes of each fight. But I think that answer is pretty naive. If it were entirely up to the powers that Araki throws into a fight, then very similar powers like Yellow Temperance and K'Noom would end in very similar ways. K'Noom? 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 Kunumu! Alright, let's go with that. But we know that tonally and literally, Yellow Temperance and Kunumu are very different fights. They end in completely different ways. One is action-based, one is comedy-based, etc, etc. As many of us JoJo fans have probably felt while reading the manga or watching the show, every fight in JoJo feels unique, refreshing, unlike anything we've seen so far in the series, like it's constantly reinventing itself within the same part. Take these two very similar fights from part 4, whose outcomes, character arcs, and purpose in the story are very similar to one another. One is Tamami's The Lock, and the other is Yukako's Love Deluxe. Both of these feature selfish villains who intrude upon the life of a weak character and force him into a situation where they can take advantage of him. But said character, Koichi Hirose, but you don't need to remember his name, develops out of his cowardice and defeats the threat to his well-being. Except that those two fights don't feel similar in the slightest. Consider in a show like Yu Yu Hakusho, where certain fights are mimicked for comedic or dramatic effect. JoJo could very much take the same approach to at least one or two of its fights, especially in the case with Koichi, where the elements of the fight are almost identical. But Araki chooses not to. Whereas the Tamami fight is very much about Koichi's struggle to find a voice, to not be overshadowed by his circumstances, and to fight back against the whims of the antagonist, his fight against Yukako is about validating that change, and to show that Koichi's will can no longer be shattered by someone who ignores that self-respect and that voice that he developed in the previous fight. The thing to take away from this example is that Araki constructs fights not around the powers present in them, but around the characters who are pit against each other. Tamami is written to be the antithesis, a certified foil to Koichi. He's an active character and strong-willed, but manipulative and selfish. At this point in the story, Koichi is shown to be good-natured but cowardly and timid. Yukako is like Tamami squared, not just selfish but possessive, not just strong-willed but harmfully so. And Koichi, during that fight, is himself an active character who manages to help Josuke and Okuyasu track him down, but unlike Yukako, is selfless enough to save his adversary over himself. Notice that in both these fights, their stand powers don't even figure into the comparison because it means nothing to why the fight exists or why it's between these characters. Where the stand powers do factor in is in making the development these characters experience literal. When I say Koichi finds a voice in his fight against Tamami, he does it literally. It's literally him finding the voice to say, look at me, I'm right. And this jackass is wrong, something the good-natured Koichi couldn't have done when he first ran over Tamami's cat, and he needed Josuke and Okuyasu to say it for him then. When Koichi develops Echoes, it's not that Echoes saved him from Tamami's manipulation by gifting him this power. Koichi develops the voice to be angry and expressive against his adversaries. He finally develops the emotion that he really wants to beat someone's ass, in Josuke's words, and in doing so, saves himself by using a power he's had since he was shot by the arrow, but one he's never thought to use. So when we get to the fight against Yukako and the reveal of Echoes Act 2, it feels so different from that of Act 1 because we already knew Koichi had the self-respect and the voice to convey his emotions clearly to others because of the fight against Tamami. It's when he confronts an enemy like Yukako, who is literally deaf to the emotions of others, that he finds that he needs a stronger method of conveying his feelings. And that's when Echo's power evolves from the mental to the physical. In a way, it's like Koichi slapped Yukako's obsession for him out of her, having spent an entire episode of the show trying to talk her out of it. To those of you who are still dubious, I present Trish Una from part 5. Her stand, Spice Girl, is one of the few that can talk, and when it first appears it has these words to say: "I have always been here, I have always been at your side, ever since you were a little girl." In other words, Trish has always had this power, but it only awakens at a time where Trish has deeply conflicting emotions on her role in the story. She has just been betrayed by her father and is now helping Bruno's gang to find the boss's identity, not out of the sense of righteousness they feel, but instead to satisfy her own curiosity about her past. She's hesitant to take up arms against her father, but wants to help the people who saved her life. These contradictions let us, the readers, sympathize with Trish, a character that we've barely seen eye to eye with up until that point. As Fugo notes, we don't even know what her favorite kind of music is. But by the end of the part, we see Trish develop from a spoiled girl to a strong-willed individual who decides to take fate in her own hands, and that change starts with the battle on the plane against Notorious B.I.G. Notorious B.I.G., whom I'll call Biggie just because it's easier, is the personification of the single-minded dedication that Pashone's elite defense squad have for the boss. Its user isn't even important. That's all we need to know to give emotional context to the fight between Biggie and Trish. One is a determined, focused attacker that has its sights only on whatever is moving fastest in its vicinity. The other is conflicted about her future, hesitant to commit to the only people she can trust. It's against Biggie that she comes face to face with what Bruno's gang are doing to protect her. Trish sees Giorno lose both his arms to save her, sacrificing his ability to save the wounded Mista and Narancia in the process. When she is given a chance to repay that debt, for the first time in the part, we finally see Trish taking an active role, not hesitating for an instant. She willfully compromises her own well-being to distract Biggie from killing the only chance for Giorno, Mista and Narancia to survive the fight. It's at that very desperate moment. Like Koichi, Trish has unlocked a power she never knew she had, to do what she knows to be right, regardless of how frightening the consequences may be. She fights completely devoted to saving Giorno's regenerating arm without even knowing of her stand power, and that's Trish's true development in this fight. Not that she can now manifest Spice Girl, or that she has gained the ability to soften things. It's the fact that she can make decisions for herself and has grown to become selfless. Spice Girl, the stand, is simply a tool that allows Araki to keep the action flowing while making these emotional changes in Trish more obvious by having her stand explicitly stating to Trish that hesitation leads to weakness. Araki himself makes explicit the similarities between Koichi and Trish numerous times. Take, for example, that they are the only characters in their respective parts who we, the readers, get to see manifest their stand for the first time. Furthermore, Spice Girl and Echoes are two of the few rare stands that can talk, embodying the notion that these characters are expressing thoughts that are part of them, but have been distant to them for so long. Echoes swears like a sailor because, as many in the fandom have noted, that's Koichi's inner anger and withheld emotions finding release.
Let's kill the whole beach!
Spice Girl's You Have Already Made Up Your Mind is Trish convincing herself that she must, regardless of the consequences, protect Giorno's new arm, a decision she reached by developing into someone willing to risk self-harm for the greater good. And finally, it's no coincidence that Echoes and Spice Girl specifically ask for orders from their masters, as both Koichi and Trish finally find the willpower to make decisions that they believe in. At this point, we've established one very crucial point in Araki's writing, that it's all about the characters, especially in these do-or-die fights where both sides become desperate to succeed and their true natures are revealed. Yes, the stands are cool and sometimes terrifying, but they're only a visual metaphor that simultaneously enhance and distract from the drama of the characters at play. This, to many JoJo fans, is obvious, but it's something that keeps us loving this manga years after the pages were first drawn. But this alone doesn't answer the question we had at the start of this video. Who are the musicians in the songs that we know as JoJo fights? And what do these musical metaphors even mean for us as JoJo fans? And your first response to that might be, hang on, didn't we already establish that Araki was the musician in these songs? You'd be right to assume that Araki did create the fight as the author and artist of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but if you were to call him the sole creator of any given fight, then you'd be ignoring the point that we've developed with Koichi and Trish, that every fight is deeply tied to the psychology and the emotions of the characters involved in them. Without these characters' input by being believable and relatable, none of the character writing that these fights embrace would have any depth. Araki creates characters, and he creates their stands, and yes, he chooses how those characters will use their stands during their fights. But if the characters' actions don't align with how we've come to see them, then there's nothing Araki can do to redeem the fight from being confusing, meaningless, or frustrating. Luckily for us, Araki is a strong enough writer that this rarely happens after stands are introduced. But there are plenty of fights in parts 1 and 2 where the enemy is such a blank slate in terms of development that you wonder why the encounter is there to begin with. So really, Araki can't take all the credit for the quality of a fight. While Araki is responsible for setting up the fight and making it feel worth the audience's time, maybe even throwing in some to keep things truly bizarre, it's really up to the characters in a particular fight to provide the correct emotional climax and denouement to make the fight both a memorable and unique one. This exploration of conflict is prevalent in nearly all excellent works. Take any of Hunter x Hunter's best fights and you'll see all of these elements reappearing. The consistency of the character in their actions, the emotional depth behind their choices, and the nature of the conflict between the fighting parties always have the mark of being carefully scrutinized. It's this back and forth between the author respecting his own characters and the characters respecting their own motivations that leads to the best fights. In a recent interview, Araki himself admits to as much. Probed on the death of the character Iggy in part 3, Araki responds by saying, and I quote from the interview, that he regretted killing Iggy and actually wanted the character to survive. The story decided that the death was necessary and he had no control over it. Araki himself is then quoted saying, "If you force the story, something breaks. It would feel like I'd have sold my soul for the story." So this is it. This is what I've been building up to. Araki is not the musician of the fights he creates. There are forces that he respects far greater than himself that are actually telling, actually performing the story. And at this point, I think you know what I'm talking about. It's the characters themselves. It's the characters present in any single fight that are twisting and changing the scope and the intensity and the outcome of a fight by their determination, their motivations, and their development as a character. To return to our musical analogy, these fights are like an improvisational piece. The fights don't follow a rigorous structure. By their very nature, the story is only tangentially referenced like a melody in a jazz piece. The characters' personal conflicts take center stage, and their compromises or their sacrifices to outdo their enemies grip us emotionally as we're constantly left wondering if this will be their last fight. Every single fighter, villain or hero is fighting with all they've got, not holding back for the sake of honor or because of that classic leveling up trope where after playing around with the heroes, the bad guy finally says, "Ooh, it's time to reveal my true power." No, there's none of that. They're always staking their lives to win. And when they come face to face with the enemy, both of them are writing their own stories, composing that fight just like an improvised song. To quote Ryan Gosling, it's brand new every fight.
Very, very exciting.
Yeah, what about Kenny G?
What?
What about Kenny G?
Obviously, Araki himself has developed as an artist and an author, but where characters like Kenny G existed in Part 3, we still have characters like Chocolate Disco in Part 7, who have their literal 5 seconds in the spotlight and then disappear. And really, you've got me there. I really can't argue with that. Trying to pigeonhole fights like Kenny G and Chocolate Disco into this much bigger metaphor about improvisational music is an insult to, well, the metaphor, but also to Araki's achievements as a writer when he really nails that kind of fight down, like he does for the majority of Part 5. I think that Araki just wanted to fill out a particular story point, like why Dio's mansion is a maze, or why Gyro couldn't help Johnny when the ladder was shot, and that excuses those fights from needing to be this big exploration of the characters at hand. Let's pull back to my previous video. We've finally explored all 3 facets of that metaphor I was talking about. Parts as albums, fights as songs, characters as musicians. All we're left with is the simple question: why should we care about this analogy? It's whimsical and fun to think about, but does it really lend a greater understanding of the series to us as the audience? And, well, I'd like to point at this video and all the discussion that we've had about character-driven stories and conflicts, shrug my shoulders and say yes. But there's more we can add to it than that. Consider that this metaphor is unique to JoJo, because Araki is the only mangaka that consistently revamps what his art looks like, feels like, and has to say. We as JoJo fans should care about this metaphor because JoJo is the only manga that it applies to, that has a part-by-part structure where every part has a fight-by-fight structure. It's so unique in its execution and its enjoyability that there are plenty of people to whom it just won't make sense. And so when we finally meet our own Emma Stones that can say,
I hate JoJo's Bizarre Adventure,
without having committed to understanding it or seeing it from our perspective, we can be the Ryan Goslings who share why we're so passionate about this unorthodox series.
What are you doing right now?
And that, I think, is the strongest answer I can give to the 2 questions we explored in this video. Firstly, Araki's character-driven writing is so strong that it's seldom the case where it doesn't feel like the characters are writing the series, rather than Araki, and Araki himself has acknowledged this. Secondly, exploring JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as a discography rather than as a manga lets us admire the series' genius and uniqueness among other manga from a different light, while also providing a comprehensive metaphor that helps non-fans appreciate Araki's creative voice. Oh, well, that was a very long script. My throat almost gave way about halfway through, but that was very fun to do. And you know, I could talk endlessly about so many of these points that I brought up. Something especially that I'm interested in doing is going through the Grateful Dead and Beach Boy fight, because a lot of what inspired me to talk about this musical analogy stuff came from my feelings on the Grateful Dead and Beach Boy fight alongside the Green Day fight. So expect some kind of analysis video on those fights specifically, because I do love them a lot. And of course I have the Purple Haze feedback audiobook coming out as well. So a lot of JoJo content. It's very exciting. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed thinking about it and producing it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to give it a like, share it so it gets a lot of exposure, you know, that helps the channel and I'll be eternally grateful. And of course, subscribe so you know when the latest JoJo video is coming out. And so, with all that being said, thank you very much for listening, and I guess you could say for now, this discussion is to be continued.